Speaker, I must first congratulate you on your acceptance of this honorable position. I also anticipate that you will be fair and of political neutrality. Mr. Speaker, we are here today under the clouds of distrust. I had anticipated that we would have started this session with an understanding that we will move this country forward and there will be an absence of discrimination and there will be an absence of doubts and there will be some reasoning on both sides of this house and that we'll find common ground to work together. I'm very disappointed how our Amerindian brothers and sisters were treated. But I'm furthermore disappointed at the potential threat to our democracy. I don't have a problem with military personnel being in the high offices, because some of the military personnel are my friends. No, I have more than one military friend, not you alone. Not you alone. Don't praise yourself. I have more than one, not just you. And so I don't have a problem with that, because we all are close to each other's telephone. My concern is when the government decides that even though we are almost 50-50 in this parliament, that they will form an advisory committee on constitutional reform without including the opposition. It's a threat. It's a potential threat to democracy. It sounds like Burundi all over again. Mr. Speaker, this National Assembly will become battle-weary because they want seat separation. And from time to time, Mr. Speaker, both sides might believe that you have not made the right ruling. But this should not trouble you. As an East Coast man, you should have been accustomed to turbulence. Mr. Speaker, on the same positive note, I want to welcome the Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Jordan, to this National Assembly. And it's always good to sit with a former student of the opposition leader, the Honorable Barrett Jagdeo. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform my colleagues on the other side you're a bad student. You want to beat your headmaster. Oh, it's okay. It's just for the haunted house. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform my colleagues on the other side. My presence on this occasion must coincide with the need for this assembly to work as one, especially since some of us have friends on both sides, and we must use this relationship to find common ground so at the end of these sessions, the Guyanese people and the world can see a more mature Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I once again must congratulate the Minister, the Honorable Member, who has attempted to lay the foundation for a better Guyana. But I'm sure he ought to recognize that he stands between two extremes. An extreme when the nation had a brittle economy and when it was fostered with abnormal high interest rates being the norm, a nation that lacked possible water, citizens that felt the wrath of dictatorship in a then police state, a nation with zero tolerance and zero production in agriculture, a nation with collapsed bauxite industry, a nation with no proper roads, a nation with a backward educational system, a nation that was deemed as a failed state, and a government that distributed 30 house lots in 15 years. Mr. Speaker, is that extreme that the Honorable Minister Winston Jordan knew before the entrance of the PPP? The other extreme he now knows is a nation with a thriving housing development sector, with dozens of spanking housing schemes, from Diamond to Tushan, Eccles to Miller's Ward. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister has seen with his own eyes the delivery of water, potable water, to 90% of our citizens, including our Amerindian brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has seen the improvement of the infrastructure in the villages and towns in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister has witnessed the positive annual growth rate of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, even when the Honorable Minister wears his dark sunglasses, he can see the development such as the East Bank Highways, Borby Harbour Bridge, dozens of new schools, health centers and hospitals, the various shopping malls, including the BPAT Center at Liliendal, Movie Tongue in Turkine, Marriott Hotel, road rehabilitation from Purica to Villeneuve, Guyana Goldfields, and dozens more, like the Sherry Street Rehabilitation Project, the Lenora Hall-Weather Track, and the National Stadium. These are things that have been done. Mr. Speaker, I speak of these, of the dark days under Honorable Minister Carl Greenwich, my friend, and he shouldn't feel bad about this, because some of the best people have administered dark days. And the great days of progress we now enjoy because of the mentor of Minister Jordan. The one who has given him an opportunity to stand before us today, and that's no other than the opposition leader. Mr. Speaker, when one hears about a national budget, one anticipates a document that represents a roadmap that will move a nation from point A to point B. Mr. Speaker, I have tremendous respect for Mr. Jordan, and he knows that. He knows that. This budget is not his choice. So I must come to his defense. I have to. This budget is not his choice. He has more capacity than this. I know that. I want to believe this budget was written by the Honorable Minister Sharma. And I'll tell you why. It lacks creativity, lacks any major initiatives. It's a recipe of broken promises to this nation. It cheapens public servants. It blindfolds those who use the Berbice Bridge. And Mr. Speaker, this budget is a bookkeeper manual. In many ways, it's cut and paste. Mr. Speaker, where are the new ideas? Every single item is a reduction or addition to the PPP proposed budget. Mr. Speaker, a C-grade business student in economics at Queen's College could have found 5 initiatives to put in this country's budget. Mr. Speaker, reducing the Berbice Bridge toll by $300 cannot save this economy. It's a cheap gimmick. Mr. Speaker, closing clubs. Mr. Speaker, closing clubs at 2 a.m. cannot help this economy. Mr. Speaker, you got to defend me, you know. I don't want to be crude. I'm begging you I'm humbly begging you for your protection, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, closing clubs at 2 a.m. cannot help this economy. Mr. Speaker, giving 5,000 more for school uniforms cannot help this economy. Mr. Speaker, what about the initiatives in electricity? What about security? What about rice and sugar? What about our diplomatic relations with Venezuela? This budget, Mr. Speaker, is a cheap attempt at a forensic analysis of what the Guyana public deserve. I want to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, $1 billion loan buy, $1 billion investment. And guess what? It wasn't bought by dope money. Guyana public deserve. I want to make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, and with no disrespect to Finance Minister, I believe he was given time and independence, he would have prepared a more appropriate budget. Let me start, Mr. Speaker, with Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. GGMC must be allowed to expand its potential. The agency needs to identify areas with economic potential, like the southern Rupununi for semi-precious stones, and to set up industries to cut and polish the stones. Mr. Speaker, GGMC needs to start looking at potential exploitation of kaolin, feldspar, etc. Mr. Speaker, we need to do more for small miners, such as establish a credit union and commercial banks to work with small miners in times of difficulties where they can borrow money with reasonable interest rate. Mr. Speaker, this government budget is silent on these issues. Mr. Speaker, several areas of this country need more roads so there can be better access to new mineral property and gold-bearing areas. Again, the budget is silent on this. Mr. Speaker, we need to open reserve state land Epping, Parasol, 5-star, etc. So we can create more opportunities for miners and expand the pool. I got enough. Mr. Speaker, accidents can only reduce if more technical people are involved in the process. DGMC must create a start training program for all levels of miners so they can be more acquainted with the issues. This area requires funding from the government. Again, Mr. Speaker, the budget does not address these issues. In general, we need to rework our mining rules and regulations so that reclamation activities of mining areas can go into effect. Small miners. Small miners must provide a bond and a reasonable plan so the area can be reclaimed. They must also provide a basic mining plan that satisfies the health and safety procedures, in particular those who work in pits. Small miners working in landlord properties must have broader protection. Too many times, and Minister Brooms, to her credit, have spoken with this for a number of years. Too many times small miners find gold and diamonds in the big man or the landlord's property, and the next morning they're thrown off. We need to protect them. We need to have legislation to protect small miners. Don't need you. Medium and large-scale miners. Government must implement stronger regulations in respect to these owners. No lease must be granted unless there's a preliminary reclamation and mining permit. The bond must be able to implement the reclamation activities of the mine-out area. Government should limit the amount of lands owned by persons, companies, partnerships, and must have a system that encourages transparency and competition so that new blood can enter the industry. Government at this point of time should have a floating fee or a floating license fee, which allows Cabinet to make recommendations to the appropriate minister when gold prices stumbles on the world market. Well, you know, we grow. You only buy and growing is you. Mr. Speaker, this government is very shallow on commitment to transparency and diversification of the wealth of the nation. It's the same thing. The big gets bigger and the small gets smaller. Forestry. Mr. Speaker, contrary to the wild reports from APNU FC, the forestry sector is one of our most productive agencies. There are 54 forestations countrywide. In 2000, there was implementation nationally of computerized barcode. Total allocated state forests, 55% is allocated in local ownership under 3 categories. Small forest concession, 23%, community management, 6%, large forest concession, 26%. Majority is allocated to local ownership. The remaining 45% is foreign ownership or management. Areas under local ownership, 500,000 hectares are under community ownership and management. In Region 10 alone, Mr. Speaker, we have total record state forest allocation of 275,000 hectares, which compose of 62 concessions in a part of former structure used by what is called a Friendly Society Act. Mr. Speaker, foreign companies have added to the development of this sector, and we cannot continue to demonize foreign companies and yet want them to invest. I agree, when they step over the border or over the line, they must be pulled in and dealt with. But we cannot continue to demonize foreign companies, in particular Chinese companies. These companies are owned by the government of China. We cannot politically demonize them, then run on the back door and ask for loans and grants. We have to be careful. I agree with you. They must respect our rules and regulations, but we can do that without demonizing them. I agree, I don't have a problem. Today, there are 5 main foreign operating companies within the sector. Barama to date has built and maintained close to 3,500 kilometers of roads at cost of $37 million US. That's a foreign company. Vitarno to date has built and maintained 433 kilometers of road to an approximate value of $2 million US. By Shanling, which APNU FC hates so much, has maintained 500 kilometers of roads to a total value of $8 million. And we can go on and on. Demrauer Timber, 1,300 kilometers of roads, a value of $14 million. These people have also contributed to education and social services, healthcare, mining and agricultural activities, ecotourism, and other forestry activities. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the opposition on this side, the government on that side, to work closely to continue the good work of our Forestry Commission. Do not interfere with the management. They have done an excellent job. And I'm not saying that if you find management in a compromising position, they should not be changed, they should not be removed. But don't remove them for remove's sake. That's all I'm saying. Bauxite. Mr. Speaker, the PNC under late President Forbes Lyndon Burnham had Lyndon on his knees by means of police brutality, retrenchment, union busting. It was the PPP that saved the day by means of subsidies for the industry. Mr. Speaker, Member Parliament Sunil Kumar has addressed the issue of bauxite in Region 10 and in general. He also spoke of the potential growth in other areas of the country. However, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out that bauxite in Guyana is also like the transportation system in New York. Mr. Speaker, Linden and Kokwani is like sugar and the communities in Region 6. I find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the President, the Executive President, Mr. Granger, dispatched an economic czar named Clive Thomas to Gaisuku so that the group can wave a magic wand and dispense of the subsidy and that holds the committee together. But I ask, what about a group going to Linden so they can dispense the subsidy to Region 10? Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC collaboration like to talk about Gaisuku subsidy. So let's have a look at Region 10 subsidy. And this in particular, I want the left ear of Comrade Ramtatan, the Honorable Vice President, to be wide open. Let the walls have ears, Mr. Speaker. Kokwani, 2005 to 2014, $1.7 billion in subsidy, water and electricity. Ichuni, $128 million. Linden, Mr. Ramtatan, Honorable, $20 billion. Mr. Speaker, should we assume that Linden, Ichuni, and Kokwani have the God-given right to get subsidy, and Gaisuku and sugar and the related communities should be put to pasture? Mr. Speaker, I say this in passing. The government needs to be careful, and this has to be interest also to the Prime Minister and Mr. Ramtatan. These gentlemen must not take political office at any cost, even if it means the death of Region 6. Mr. Speaker, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If Region 10, which is Afro-Guyanese, can get subsidy, so must Gaisuku and sugar, which is basically Indo-Guyanese. And so must Region 8 and 9, which are predominantly Amerindian communities. Mr. Speaker, petroleum and gas. Shame is the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, because of aggressive and sensible marketing of oil and gas resources by the PPP government, Guyana finally bore fruit after years of Sharma announcing and pronouncing that our search resulted in coconut oil by Dr. Duki, kerosene oil by late President Forbes Burnham, and dozens of wild rumors. Mr. Speaker, Exxon has finally, under the PPP administration, announced they have found an oil basin with evidence that Guyana might be on the verge of a $1 billion oil and gas industry. Mr. Speaker, we have been very practical in the matter of exploration and have included several other companies in the process of oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, we believe in nation building. It's our hope and anticipation that the new government will process and manage this new industry with the level of efficiency that is required. Mr. Speaker, I indicated in my thesis in 1975 that petroleum is the only single resource can provide the amount of revenue, can drive the economy of Guyana, a country with a small population, but a brutal infrastructure network, in particular areas where our minerals are located. Gaisuku, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, most countries have financial commitment to a particular entity. In the United States, it's public transportation. In Guyana, we have privatized public transportation because it was a burden to the state. In the great United States of America, public transportation is subsidized by the state and federal government. Mr. Speaker, there's a nexus between public transportation in the United States and economies of the private sector, in particular the private sector of Manhattan. Mr. Speaker, Just imagine employment in America, in particular Brooklyn or Queens, if the rail system collapses because of the absence of state and federal subsidy. Imagine Amtrak coming to an halt because of the absence of federal subsidy. Imagine the employment impact in a particular state. Imagine the negative consequences of growth and development of New York. Think about the link between unemployment and underdevelopment in Brooklyn and the general tri-state area. Mr. Speaker, the sugar industry in Guyana is like the New York transportation system. Mr. Speaker, only a narrow thinker will talk about Gaisuco in context of the Skeldon sugar factory alone. Gaisuco sugar and sugar represent dozens and dozens of communities, thousands of residents, thousands of children. The present sugar industry is a product of colonialization and low world prices, and to some degree, Mr. Speaker, I confess, inept management. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Clive Thomas is not the answer to Gaisuco. Even the deaf knows he's anti-Gaisuco, just an anti-sugar, and therefore, even though his input might be sound, he should not have been appointed as chairman. Mr. Speaker, I know, and the National Assembly knows, that if Dr. Thomas and his team decide tomorrow, and they recommend closing Gaisuco, His Excellency Mr. David Granger, in the same breath, must put an end to the electricity subsidy of Region 10. Got to go hand in hand, can't be one-sided. Mr. Speaker, we are in a very sensitive ethnic society. And Dr. Henry Jeffrey, in one of his eyes, well, you try it. And I see what I'm telling good to you. Oh, it's on Camraj. Don't answer. Don't answer. Thank you, sir. Dr. Henry Jeffrey, in one of his articles, suggested that the Granger regime needs to be careful so not to be tarnished with a racist slant. You cannot, on one hand, put your foot down on Gaisuco and sugar and pretend the electrical subsidies in Linden must be left alone. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Honorable Prime Minister Moses Nagamutu and the Honorable Vice President Cameron Jonathan will under no condition to agree to closing down of the sugar industry. Mr. Speaker, let's not bury our heads in the sand. Sugar is a social economic lifeline of thousands of Indo-Guyanese. And electricity subsidy is a social lifeline of thousands of Afro-Guyanese in Linden. So let Dr. Thomas enjoy the ride. Our only option is to find a methodology, maybe magical, to get the European Union to increase the price of sugar so we can bring some form of profitability to the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, Gaisuco needs proper management and a continuous practical subsidy like the New York subway system. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk. No, they run out. Show me where they're at. Well, you get upset with a couple of fish bars. Mr. Speaker, small business or set-aside program. Mr. Speaker, the PPP regime has a record of establishing hundreds of small businesses, especially those owned by Afro-Guyanese, rural Indians, women, and Amerindians. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the Honorable Minister Gaskin for his thinking and his desire to deal with the issue of economic poverty in Guyana. He has identified wisely a minimum of 20% budgetary allocation as a means to bridge the gap between the rich and poor.
Honorable Member, you have 10 minutes remaining.
That's more than adequate, sir. I think it's a good start. But this issue requires several support mechanisms, such as business and technical support. Mr. Speaker, the PPP had a roadmap that shows the way forward. First of all, there must be a commission. There must be a commission, which compromises of members of parliament and the private sector. There must be some type of registration system to accommodate all potential participants. The ministry and the government must be honest enough to say to the public that there are concerns about the gap between the rich and the poor. And this step forward is a way of ensuring that Afro-Guyanese, rural East Indians, women, Amerindians can participate in the fundamental economic policies of this country. They are humans too. They have a right to big houses. They have a right to fancy vehicles. They have a right to send their children to Paris, France. They have a right. They have a right. They have a right to board watch, like Honorable Rupnerang. They have a right to board watch. They have a right to do all these nice things. They have a right to buy a Porsche. That Honorable Minister Greenwich. All of them have these rights. But we must provide the access to them. You must not only want to have this access and lock it off. Mr. Speaker, we have a problem in Guyana. The big guys want all the bread, even the slice. We must change this culture. Both sides of the house have an obligation to change this culture, or the future of this country will be a volcano. We have to change this culture. But Mr. Speaker, the proposed agency or activity by the Honorable Minister Gaskin cannot work in isolation. We must have technical advisors, training programs, rental of equipment pool, and a strong and honest administrator. Mr. Speaker, the success and failure of this program will be based on access to financing. The Minister of Finance must leverage the money we have in the banks. These banks must not only sit on our 50 billion, they must have a section of this 50 billion. So when small people want to borrow to do their small business, they must have access. I'm not saying they must get this without collateral. I am saying though, some system must be put in place for the small people like me and Rupert can have access to this institution. Mr. Speaker, the children of Sophia, the children of Buxton, graduates of University of Guyana, the children of Letem, Enmore, Bushlock, Lenora, Leguan, Bartik, and Regina, the women of our country must be given the opportunity to own a bank or a major construction company. In America, they have what they call the SBA or the SIC program. The minister must send his staff to Washington, D.C. to sit and understand how that program works, how that program transfers thousands of people in the ghetto and make them creative and good business persons. Mr. Speaker, our young people are interested in rearing pigs and poultry. But and sheep, not goats, sheep.
Not goats, sheep.
Sheep.
I wouldn't say that.
I discriminate against goats. Yeah. However, you're not going to get the kind of support in your villages if you want to put these things in your villages. I'm suggesting to the minister that we
Honourable Member.
Industrial estates.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Plenty of time, sir. Mr. Speaker, I'm urging the Honourable Minister to look at the possibility of industrial estates in some of these villages with tax waivers and duty-free concession for companies that want to generate substantial employment. Any other solution we find this evening, Mr. Speaker. The days of young people lining up for menial jobs are over. Finally, Mr. Speaker, our young people will not be gangstered into joining national service in any sort and any manner. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honourable Member for his statement.